I sat in my car outside the lawyer's office in downtown Portland, watching my brother Marcus and sister Jennifer walk in together, both dressed in black, like they'd coordinated their outfits for the occasion. Through the glass door, I could see them greeted warmly by a receptionist, ushered down a hallway toward what I assumed was the conference room where our mother's will would be read. I wasn't invited. 3 days after Mom's funeral, Marcus had sent me a single text message that said the estate lawyer would be handling everything privately with the immediate beneficiaries, and that I'd be notified if there was anything I needed to know. When I called the law office directly, the paralegal told me gently that my name wasn't on the list for the reading, that perhaps there had been a family decision to handle things differently. I understood what that meant. They'd cut me out completely. I'd expected some inequality. Maybe a smaller share, but not total erasure. Mom had been sick for 18 months before she died, and during that time, Jennifer had moved into the house in Lake Oswego to help with her care. I lived 2 hours away in Eugene, working as a financial analyst and raising my 7-year-old daughter alone after my divorce. I drove up every weekend, brought groceries, handled Mom's medical bills and insurance claims, sat with her during her worst nights. But Jennifer was there daily. And Marcus, who lived 20 minutes away, visited 3 or 4 times a week, often bringing takeout and staying to watch television with them. I told myself that presence mattered, that maybe my contributions were less visible. When Mom died, Jennifer had been the one holding her hand. I'd been stuck in traffic on Interstate 5, my phone buzzing with increasingly frantic messages that I couldn't safely read while driving. I arrived 40 minutes too late, and the look on Jennifer's face told me I'd failed some fundamental test. Growing up, the dynamics had always been skewed. Marcus was the golden child, the one who played varsity football and got into University of Oregon on a partial scholarship. Jennifer was the baby, coddled and forgiven for every mistake, every half-finished project, every borrowed $20 that never got repaid. I was the middle child who kept my head down, got straight A's without being asked, paid for my own college through scholarships and work-study programs, never caused problems or asked for help. Mom loved us all. I believed that, but her attention and her resources flowed most readily toward my siblings. When Marcus needed a car at 16, Mom bought him a used Camry. When Jennifer wanted to study abroad, her junior year, Mom somehow found $5,000. When I needed help with textbooks my freshman year, Mom told me she was sure I'd figure it out, and I did, picking up extra shifts at the campus library. The pattern continued into adulthood. Marcus started 3 different businesses that failed, and each time Mom quietly paid off his debts. Jennifer went through a series of bad relationships and moved home for separate times, and Mom never charged her rent or asked when she might leave. When I bought my first house, a modest bungalow in Eugene, I invited Mom to the housewarming, and she came for an hour before saying she needed to get back to help Jennifer with something. I didn't let myself feel hurt. I told myself I was independent, that needing less made me stronger. After the funeral, I'd gone back to Mom's house to help sort through her belongings. Jennifer met me at the door and said she'd already started organizing things. That maybe it would be better if I took a few days before coming back, gave her time to make some decisions about what to keep and what to donate. I'd pushed past her politely, walked into Mom's bedroom, and found that most of the jewelry was already gone. The antique dresser where Mom kept her important papers was locked, and when I asked Jennifer for the key, she said the lawyer had advised her to secure all estate documents until everything was properly Something cold settled in my chest. Then, I nodded, took a few photo albums Jennifer said I could have, and drove home. For 2 weeks, I heard nothing. Then came Marcus's text about the will reading. I called him directly, and he didn't answer. I called Jennifer and she picked up, but said she couldn't talk, that the lawyer was handling everything and I should be patient. I asked her directly if I was in the will, and she said she didn't know, that Mom had made her own choices, and we all had to respect that. Her voice had this practiced sympathy that made my skin crawl. Sitting in my car that morning, watching them disappear into the lawyer's office, I felt something shift inside me. Not anger exactly, but a cold clarity. I'd spent my whole life being the easy child, the one who didn't make waves, who absorbed unfairness without complaint. I'd told myself it made me better, stronger, more mature. But maybe it had just made me invisible. Maybe my silence had taught them I didn't matter. I drove back to Eugene and went to work, but I couldn't focus. That evening, after I put my daughter to bed, I sat at my kitchen table and made a list of everything I knew about Mom's assets. The house in Lake Oswego, which she'd bought in 1987 for $90,000 and which was now worth at least $750,000. She'd mentioned rental properties over the years, a duplex somewhere in southeast Portland, maybe something else. She had investments, an IRA, a pension from her 30 years teaching elementary school. I'd helped her with her taxes for the past 5 years. So I had some documentation, but not everything. The next morning, I called the Multnomah County Property Records Office and requested information on any properties titled in my mother's name. The clerk was helpful and told me I could access most of it online through the county's public records database. That night, after work, I logged in and started searching. What I found made my hands shake. Mom owned 4 properties, not 2. The house in Lake Oswego, yes, and the duplex in southeast Portland. But also a small commercial building in Beaverton that was leased to a dental practice, and a 3-bedroom house in Gresham that was rented to a family. According to the tax records, the combined assessed value was over $2 million. The Beaverton property alone was generating $7,500 a month in rental income, and the Gresham house brought in $2,200. I'd had no idea. Mom had lived modestly, driven an old Honda, complained about the cost of groceries. But she'd been quietly building a real estate portfolio that would have secured all of us financially. I pulled the detailed property records, which showed transaction histories. The Beaverton commercial property had been purchased 8 years ago. The financing documents listed Jennifer as a co-signer on the mortgage, which meant she'd known about it. The Gresham house had been purchased 6 years ago, and Marcus was listed as the property manager, receiving a monthly fee of $200. They'd both been involved in Mom's financial life in ways I'd never been invited into, and now they were cutting me out entirely. I filed a request for Mom's death certificate and ordered copies of all her property deeds. I opened a folder on my laptop labeled estate documentation and began methodically organizing everything. I pulled my old tax files and scanned every return I'd prepared for Mom, every piece of financial correspondence we'd exchanged. I went through my emails and found messages where Mom had asked me to review investment statements or explain Medicare billing, proof that I'd been actively involved in her affairs, even if I hadn't been a co-signer on any loans. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called the estate lawyer's office and asked to speak with the attorney directly. When he came on the line, I introduced myself clearly and said I was Susan Hammond's daughter and that I had concerns about being excluded from the will reading. He was professional but cool, said that he represented the estate and the named beneficiaries, and that his duty was to execute the will as written. I asked if my name appeared anywhere in the document. There was a pause, and then he said he couldn't discuss the contents with non-beneficiaries. I thanked him and hung up. That told me everything. I wasn't in the will at all. I spent the next 3 days gathering more documentation. I found old birthday cards from Mom where she'd written about how proud she was of me, how much she appreciated my help. I located the folder where I'd kept records of every expense I'd covered for her over the years. Gas money for my weekend trips, the $700 I'd paid when her furnace broke and she didn't have the cash on hand, the Medicare Part D penalty I'd helped her dispute and resolve. It wasn't about the money. Exactly. It was about proving I'd been present, that I'd mattered, that erasing me wasn't just unkind but factually inaccurate. I also started researching Oregon estate law. I learned that children have no automatic right to inherit, that parents can disinherit kids for any reason or no reason, but I also learned that wills can be contested if there's evidence of undue influence. If someone in a position of power over a vulnerable person manipulated them into changing their estate plan. Jennifer had been living in the house during Mom's final 18 months, when Mom was sick and declining, when her judgment might have been compromised. If Mom had changed her will during that period, and if Jennifer had been the one encouraging it or even drafting it, that could be grounds for a challenge. I filed a formal request with the probate court for a copy of the will. As a biological child, I had legal standing to request it, regardless of whether I was named as a beneficiary. The court clerk said it would take about a week. While I waited, I hired a private investigator, spending $800 I really couldn't afford, to look into the timeline of Mom's will. I wanted to know when it had been drafted, who had been present, whether there were any previous versions. The investigator worked quickly. Within 5 days, he sent me a report. Mom had drafted her first will in 2003, leaving everything divided equally among the three of us. She'd updated it in 2011 to specify certain personal items and to name Marcus as executor. But in February of last year, 14 months before her death and 4 months after Jennifer moved in, she'd executed a completely new will. This version left the Lake Oswego house and all personal property to Jennifer, the rental properties and investment accounts to Marcus, and nothing to me. There was a single line that read, "I make no provision for my daughter Catherine as she has demonstrated independence, and requires no assistance from my estate." When I read that line, something inside me cracked. Not because I needed the money, though it would have helped, but because that wasn't Mom's voice. Mom would never have phrased it that way. Cold and formal and dismissive. Mom used to tell me she worried about me, working so hard and managing everything alone. She used to say I was the strongest of her children, but that everyone needed support, sometimes. This language sounded like a lawyer's draft, or worse, like Jennifer's justification for why I deserved nothing. The investigator's report included another detail. The 2024 will had been drafted by a different attorney than the previous versions, a lawyer whose office was 3 blocks from Jennifer's apartment at the time. Jennifer had found him, scheduled the appointment, driven Mom there, and been present in the room when the will was signed. The witnesses were 2 paralegals from that office who'd never met my mother before, and who couldn't testify to her state of mind or capacity. I took all of this documentation, organized it into a clear timeline, and made an appointment with my own attorney, a probate specialist in Eugene, who came recommended by a colleague. Her name was Rita Nugent, and she was in her 50s, direct and thorough. I laid out everything I'd found, and she listened without interrupting, taking notes. When I finished, she sat back and said this was exactly the kind of case that made her angry, that she saw it too often, adult children manipulating elderly parents, and justifying it as caregivers. We filed a formal will contest in Multnomah County Probate Court, alleging undue influence and diminished capacity. We requested that the 2011 will be reinstated as the valid document, which would restore the equal distribution. We also filed a motion for full estate accounting, demanding that Marcus and Jennifer provide detailed records of all financial transactions involving Mom's accounts and properties during the period Jennifer lived in the house. The response was immediate and furious. Marcus called me screaming, asking how I could do this to the family, how I could disrespect Mom's wishes, how I could be so greedy. I told him calmly that Mom's wishes as expressed in 2011 were for us to share equally, and that the 2024 version wasn't her authentic voice. Hung up on me. Jennifer sent a long text message about how she'd sacrificed everything to care for Mom, how she'd put her own life on hold, how I'd barely been there and now wanted to swoop in and take what I hadn't earned. I didn't respond. Rita was strategic. She deposed Jennifer and Marcus separately, asking detailed questions about Mom's mental state in her final year, about who had suggested the new will, about what specific conversations had led to my being excluded. Jennifer claimed Mom had been frustrated with me for not visiting more often, which was demonstrably false based on the calendar logs I'd kept. Marcus said Mom felt I didn't need the inheritance because I had a good job, which contradicted every conversation I'd documented where Mom worried about me being a single parent. The depositions also revealed something I hadn't known. During the year Jennifer lived with Mom, she'd been using Mom's debit card to pay for her own expenses, groceries, and gas and shopping trips that had nothing to do with Mom's care. The estate accounting we'd forced them to produce showed over $30,000 in questionable withdrawals. When Rita confronted Jennifer about this, she claimed Mom had given her permission, had wanted to help her get back on her feet. But there was no documentation, no written agreement, just Jennifer's word. Rita also found something in the property records I'd missed. 2 months before Mom died, Jennifer had tried to add her own name to the title of the Lake Oswego house, filing a quitclaim deed that would have made them joint tenants with right of survivorship. The deed had been rejected by the county because it wasn't properly notarized, but the attempt was documented. If it had gone through, Jennifer would have owned the house automatically upon Mom's death, outside the will entirely. We presented all of this to the probate judge in a hearing that lasted 4 hours. Rita was meticulous, walking through the timeline, the questionable withdrawals, the attempted property transfer, the circumstances of the 2024 will drafting. She presented statements from Mom's doctors showing that her cognitive function had been declining in her final year, that she'd been on medications that affected her judgment, that she'd been vulnerable to influence. She showed the contrast between Mom's own words in letters and cards, warm and loving, toward me, and the cold dismissal in the will. Jennifer's attorney argued that adult children had no inherent right to inherit, that Mom had made a clear choice, that the 2024 will was properly executed and should stand, but he couldn't explain the attempted property transfer, couldn't justify the $30,000 in undocumented withdrawals, couldn't provide any evidence that Mom had actually been angry with me or felt I didn't deserve consideration. The judge took 2 weeks to issue a ruling. She found that while the 2024 will was technically valid in its execution, there was substantial evidence of undue influence given Jennifer's position of dependence and control in the household during Mom's vulnerable final year. She ruled that the 2011 will should be reinstated, which meant equal distribution of the estate among the three of us. She also ordered Jennifer to repay the $30,000 in questionable withdrawals, with interest to be deducted from her share. And she removed Marcus as executor and appointed an independent professional to manage the estate distribution. My share came to just under $600,000 after all debts and fees were paid. I used part of it to set up a college fund for my daughter, paid off my mortgage, and put the rest in investments. But the money wasn't the point. Not really. The point was that I'd been seen, that my presence in Mom's life had been acknowledged. That silence and accommodation hadn't made me disappear. Jennifer and Marcus haven't spoken to me since the ruling. At first, that hurt more than I expected. But, over time, I've realized that a relationship that only existed when I stayed small and asked for nothing wasn't a relationship worth keeping. I miss the idea of family, the hope that we could have supported each other through grief and built something stronger. But I don't miss the reality of being erased. My daughter asks sometimes why we don't see her aunt and uncle anymore. I tell her that sometimes people and families disagree about important things, and that we have to take care of ourselves and stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. I tell her that being kind doesn't mean letting people treat you as if you don't matter. I hope she's learning something I had to discover too late, that your voice has value, that documentation is power, that silence isn't always strength. If you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever been the one who kept quiet while others took and took, I want you to know that you can speak up. You can gather the evidence, find the right help, and stand your ground. It won't always feel good, and you might lose relationships you thought mattered. But you'll gain something more important, the knowledge that you fought for yourself, that you refused to disappear just because it was easier for everyone else. Your story matters. Your presence matters. Don't let anyone write you out of your own life.